All right, we are diving into the female reproductive system today and going through anatomy pieces. Again, some of the slides I'm going to show you here are not in your textbook. Again, I put the images PowerPoint up on Schoology, and that's what I'm going through today, is using the images PowerPoint, not the lecture PowerPoint piece. Most of the material I'm talking about is in the lecture PowerPoint, but again, I added more pictures and other pieces here that aren't there, so that's why I'm going here. So this is, I call it the textbook view of the female reproductive system, which always makes me laugh, because like nobody actually ever looks like that. You never see somebody sliced this way without the leg, right? You got to get the leg out of the way too. It's weird. But again, I understand the point. The point is they're trying not to be pornographic. Okay, I hear you. So let's go through the female anatomy, starting from the outside. You have two outer folds, which are called the labia majus or minus, or the labia majorum or labia minorum. There's lots of different names for it. And these are simply just folds of tissue that are covering the openings of the vagina and the urethra and the clitoris. The clitoris is this piece of erectile tissue. We'll talk more in detail about that as we're going. That's on the more anterior side of the vulva, is what they call this whole area here. You have the opening for the urethra that comes out. Thank you. The opening for the urethra, and then posterior to that you have the vagina. Continuing posterior, you have the anus, of course, with the exit being the exit from the digestive system, the rectum, large intestine emptying into this area. If you move up from the urethra, you get the bladder, again, just like in the guys. But notice separate tubes, right? Urethra and vagina, two separate pieces. Whereas in the male, all of the reproductive fluids come into the urethra to be exited out the penis, right? If you move up the vagina, you get to the uterus. The opening of the uterus is what they call the cervix. Maybe you've heard about your cervix being dilated when you're about to have a baby. They're talking about that opening literally stretching. We'll talk much more about that. If you continue on up from the uterus, and this picture does not show it very well, you have these uterine tubes, or the fallopian tubes, which is where the egg would travel down from the ovary. And the ovary at the very top here, that is the primary sexual organ in the female. So some people might want to say the vagina is. No. The ovary. Just like the testy is the primary sexual organ for the male. It makes sense. Because what's the whole point of this system? To reproduce. And in order to reproduce, the female needs to provide the egg. And where is that egg produced? In the ovary. Does that make sense? So, the same job that the guys have, because the guy's job, the whole job of the guys, is to produce the sperm and to deliver that sperm to the female. The lady's job is to produce the egg, to accept that sperm and to allow a place for them to meet and begin to grow, but even more importantly, to then nurture that egg for 9 months as it grows into a baby. And so that's it. The lady has other organs that are allowing it to do that. Again, we'll talk in much more detail about these pieces. And that would be, of course, what the uterus's job. That is its whole entire function, is to allow a place for that egg, that fertilized egg, to implant and a place for it to grow. If you're looking at an exterior view of what again, we call this the vulva or the perineum. There's lots of different words, all meaning the same thing. The labia majorum, so these are the outer lips, the inner lips, and that's literally what labia means. It's Latin for lips. You have, again, 3 different openings, which is different than on the guys, right? Guys, you have urethra coming out of the penis, and you have the anus. But in the ladies, there are 3 separates. The urethral opening, the vagina, and the anus. And at the very top, right where these folds kind of come together, is where you have the clitoris. The mons pubis again, this is in Latin, it's the pubic mound. Okay? And that is just simply the covering because the pubic bone runs right across the top there. So there's this elevation there that, again, they call the mons pubis. You may have noticed in this that there's a couple of pieces missing that the guys had. Obviously, no penis, but that's what the clitoris is. We'll talk about that. But there are some glands, right, that the guys have. Do you remember that are producing the different parts of the seminal fluid? Do you remember the names? The prostate, and there's one other big one. Bulbourethral gland, that's the smaller one. Yeah, and there's one more. I'm testing you. Oh, let's pull up the picture. So we checked off bulbourethral gland, we checked off prostate. What else? It actually has a name that sounds like semen. The seminal vesicle, right? So these are producing, remember, the fluids of ejaculation, right? So if you look on this picture, none of those are present. Well, actually, they are. They just have different names in the lady's body. So again, we're talking about in the wall of the vulva, in the wall of the labia, there are these little openings. One's called the Skene's gland, and one's called the Bartholin gland. These are named for the people who found them, the doctors who found them. The Skene gland is basically the female prostate. It's not producing nearly as much fluid as the guy's does, but it does produce some lubricating fluid. The same thing with the Bartholin's gland. That is the bulbourethral gland in the ladies. So again, you have this symmetry that really what you have in the guys, you have in the ladies, taking slightly different forms, but there's symmetry there. And we'll talk about why that is as we move through. There's a covering for most women that covers the entrance to the vagina. It's called the hymen. Perhaps you've heard of this before. And this is a picture out of, again, that Netter Atlas of Anatomy that I've put up here. The same thing for a couple of those pictures are from Netter. That there are multiple different ways that the hymen presents itself. It can be very small, like not really covering much at all. It can be completely closed. The entrance to the vagina can be completely closed. That would be a problem. You would have to have that opened. Because again, you need to have that open not just for sexual activity, but for just fluid flow. Okay, not even before you have a period or a menses, you still have to have openings. There's fluid that comes through there, mucus and things. But there's other pieces there. So why is this important? Why do I even show this to you? Well, back in the day, and even sometimes today you hear about this, the conversation will be if your hymen is erupted. In other words, if it's not complete, if it's not there, it means you are no longer a virgin. And this goes all the way back to the days when they would literally check the sheets after the first time a husband and wife had sex. They would check the sheets for blood. Because if there had to be some tearing of this hymen during the first time this woman has ever had a sexual encounter, whoa, that meant that she was actually a virgin, right? And of course, this was so important that she hadn't defiled herself in some other way, right? The truth of the matter is the layers, how this hymen presents can vary significantly. Some folks are born with basically not even having one. Does that mean that they had sex? No. Are you with me? Sometimes just using tampons, sometimes just exercising, sometimes just growing causes that to tear. It's not a problem. In other words, just because you don't bleed that first time you have sex doesn't mean you aren't a virgin. Does that make sense? It's not that deep. So again, we're talking about, these would be the inner lip, the inner labia there. So it's basically just covering that outside portion of the vagina. Sure. Yeah. But again, it doesn't serve any function, truthfully. Sure, because the vagina is used to being expanded a little bit. Sure. Yeah, yeah. So it's protective. I mean, remember, this is an opening to the inside of the body. So it's one of those things that I would imagine, and again, I'm putting myself into God's shoes, you would want to limit how big that opening is as much as possible, right? Until it needs to start serving other functions. Again, to be the outlet for the menses, to be the input for sexual activity. Mm-hmm. Perhaps slightly more, but again, that's really more, certainly after the woman is engaging in sexual activity regularly, it's going to be open. Like there's not a big deal. That's just life. Does that make sense? But I did want to make sure, because some people are very concerned about this. You know, that, hey, boy, if I don't have this, or if it's not there, that means somehow I've done something wrong, or I don't know. It could just have been that was the way that you were made. Questions there? I have to keep looking at my phone because I don't remember what time we finished classes today. So 10 minutes, good. We're doing fine. Okay, this is one of my favorite slides that I put up here in the time that you all are together. Again, this is not your textbook. This is from Netter again. What this is showing you is 3 different stages of an embryo development, of a baby, a fetus, right? So we all start with our genitals looking the same. Maybe you didn't know that. You're already, again, biologically, you have either 2 X chromosomes or an X and a Y chromosome, right? So you are already biologically male or female, because really that's what makes you guys and girls, right? But you start out with all of the genitals being the same. They're undifferentiated. And then slowly, you start to get this separation between guys and girls. And again, they've colored the tissues to be the same, so that the glands of the penis, the head of the penis, becomes the head of the clitoris. And they actually have the same name, the glands. What becomes the scrotum of the guys becomes the labia of the ladies. That urethra, the tube that runs through, right? For the guys, that closes all up and becomes all internal. For the ladies, it still stays external, right? And that would be the labia minorum, the smaller lips there, as well as inside the perineum, because you have the urethral opening there. The erectile tissue here that makes up the corpus spongiosum of the guys in the penis is the same kind of stuff that is present there in the clitoris. Here's my point. Does it make sense to you that there could be problems in this differentiation? That maybe you don't. So here's our 2 extremes, right? Completely, fully functioning and formed male genitalia, completely formed and functioning female genitalia, right? They both started here. Are we cool? And here are the 2 ends. Are you comfortable it would make sense that you could have places in between there? And that oftentimes that's what we're meaning when we're talking about transgenderism? That somehow things have not fully formed or have formed in different ways between those. I'm talking about anatomical transgenderism. I'm not talking about identity transgenderism. You know, where I have the body of a male, but I feel like I'm a lady, and so I identify myself as a lady. That's different. I'm talking about the actual physical anatomical pieces. The first time I saw this, it was like, oh wow, that totally makes sense. Because we all started here. We all started as one undifferentiated genitalia. And again, over the course of the maturation in the uterus, you have these 2 polar extremes, right? Guys and girls. The male genitalia, the female genitalia. But could there be combinations of both? Could there be parcels? There are, definitely.
How can they get that much detail as the babies are developing?
The easy answer is that all babies don't make it. And so these anatomists will actually look at these fetuses that have been aborted. And when I say aborted, not means like going to abortion clinics, but that have died, and they can do that, yeah. And then they can actually trace, and that's just looking at the anatomy of it. You can also look at it from a biochemistry perspective of where these tissues come from. And the tissues are the same. The tissues that make up the labia majorum and that make up the scrotum, they're the same. So yeah, please. Right, again, not fully functioning, usually both, but yes, you do have, again, it makes sense with that timeline or spectrum in my mind. Yes, you're going to get people who are in between both, maybe a little bit of guys and a lot of bit of girls, or a lot of bit of girls and a little bit of guys. Yeah, it happens. So, I mean, usually for folks, it's fairly obvious. My son came out, oh, that's a boy. My daughter came out, oh, that's a girl. You with me? Right, that's a tough question. Right, I don't know. I don't think there is an easy answer for that. I mean, on all birth certificates, there's a place that asks for sex. So yeah, I mean, so how would you determine that? Well, which one is more? I don't know. There's some folks even nowadays that are saying, well, we don't want to assign you a gender. We want to let you figure that out. Okay. Yeah. But no, I don't think there's a good answer, an easy answer to give you, Emily, for that one. Yeah. Are you with me? So at least in my mind, it seems like folks are awfully quick to judge people who aren't on those two extremes, that they are completely male anatomy, completely female anatomy, but that's not something that they chose. It's just something that, just like somebody who's born with a defect in their arm or a mental problem, it's the same in my mind. It's the same piece. Questions there? Good, you guys are rolling. Let's go to this picture, because I think this does a much better job of showing you internal anatomy so you can get an idea of where things are. So here's our vagina coming up here, right, into the cervix. So this was, again, this sagittal view. This would be a frontal view. So again, vagina coming up, and the cervix, you get a nice view of what that looks like at the bottom there. Here's a view, basically, if you were looking up the vagina at the cervix. Okay? So again, this would be what the gynecologist or the obstetrician was looking at to see how that cervix is being dilated. This is what it looks like, kind of like a bagel. Right? And this is actually a picture that's showing the difference between a healthy cervix and a cervix that has some cancer on it. Cervical cancer, again, is a very big thing for women, just like prostate cancer is a very big thing for guys, one of the more common forms. And they're just showing you the difference, that you get this growth, these cancerous cells that are on the opening there of the cervix. If we keep moving up, now we have the body of the uterus, the main portion. And you see the different layers, the endometrium, the myometrium, the perimetrium. This endometrium, which is the inner wall of the uterus, that's what goes through the growth and the shedding phase. That is what we call the menstrual cycle. So all during your cycle, you are building up that wall. Why? Do you remember? So the egg can implant, right? It's getting your uterus ready for their... Hello, Nathan? Did not. Yes, it's getting the uterus ready for that implantation. Moving up from there, you see that you have these two uterine tubes, or again, fallopian tubes are another name for them. And then here's the ovaries on the ends of those. You have this is kind of cross-section of that uterine tube. You see it kind of funnels out on the top. You have this thing called, that funnel, that opening is called the infundibulum, which is just really kind of Latin for funnel. And then there's little fingers on the end that they call the fimbriae. And the point of those guys is, and we'll talk much, much more about this, when the egg is released, Remember, each month there's one egg that's released. Those fimbriae help guide it into the infundibulum to allow it to then move down that uterine tube into the uterus and out. Any questions there? We timed that beautifully. All right, we will continue tomorrow talking about how that egg matures. Because ladies, all of the eggs you ever will have, you had when you were born.